Thank you so much, Dave and Lisa and everybody, because I know you've all had busy days. Today, I've had a busy day today, but it is really a blessing for me to be with you and to share the inspiration that I have, particularly in regard to youth and youth empowerment at this critical time. I would say that the young, beautiful faces before me are the future of humanity, and I am honored to be of service, if I can be, to all of you. And I want to say how much I appreciate Kindred. I really, especially the last few days, getting ready for this film, coming up with Darsha, I just feel that Kindred makes a stunning contribution. And particularly now, as we're in the throes of this climate crisis and the pandemic, I really see the uniqueness and the preciousness of what Kindred has to offer. So I want to support the awareness of Kindred and what it does. I've been doing my best to spread the word through the communities that I serve. I think Kindred is coming into its own. The time has come, really, for the resources that Kindred brings forward to be recognized and used. So it is really a delight for me to be here. I want to invite all of you to be fully engaged in what happens in our time together, to ask questions, and also to be completely able to say anything that is not clear to you, ask me to explain it, anything that is confusing or that you don't understand, or anything you disagree with or have a different perspective on. I really want to encourage your commentary and your engagement. And I want to begin by saying that I come into what I have done in my career. I'm doing my best right now. I'm 77 years old, so I'm stepping into the mantle of elderhood. And I don't often feel like I deserve that mantle. And I often don't feel 77 years old either. But the truth is that I am. And I have a great deal of experience to draw from. And I want to honor that for myself, as well as just offer it up here as a resource for all of you. That in my life, I have moved from a highly dysfunctional childhood, an immigrant childhood. I grew up in a non-English speaking household. My grandparents were illiterate, not because they were stupid or in any way unable to access literature, but they didn't speak the language of the country they ended up in. So that made them illiterate in terms of the English-speaking world. They were not highly read even in their native languages of Russian and Polish, and they actually actively spoke a third language, which is the language I grew up with, which is Yiddish. So I come from an Orthodox Jewish family that immigrated to America in the throes of the Holocaust. So the majority of our family members were lost in the Holocaust. So we are survivors of genocide, and we carry that grief, and that grief operates in sometimes incredibly destructive ways in terms of the long-term impacts of trauma and the epigenetic impacts of trauma, which I was the recipient of growing up in such a household. So those areas, trauma, epigenetics, intergenerational transmission, always fascinated me and evoked my curiosity. So I'm both an artist and a scientist, in that my curiosity led first to a kind of withdrawal that surprises people who know me now, because I'm hardly withdrawn, but I was quite withdrawn as a child and as an adolescent. And I spent many of those tumultuous, violent years in a kind of inner retreat where I wrote a lot. And being a writer is still, to this day, incredibly important to me. Language is incredibly important to me. I love language. I love languages. I've studied and have tried to use the languages that I was exposed to, Yiddish and Russian and Polish, as resources rather than seeing them as detriments because my grandparents didn't speak English, and there was some shame around that in my household. But for me, it's something to celebrate, actually, that the cultural traditions that they brought with them are traditions that I remember and that are crystal clear to me, actually. And my mom, who's now 100 years old, the only living member of her family left, doing very well, I should say, at 100 years old. I feel very privileged because within our family, I am the one who remembers her parents. I am the one who remembers the customs, the language that I grew up with. And my brother, I have only one sibling, and he's 5 years younger than me, and he doesn't really remember the way that I remember. There was a lot of dysfunction and fragmentation and shattering and breakage in my family. So he was separated from those traditions. I had more time with them. And I don't ever want to forget them, actually. And I moved from the arts into the sciences as a doctoral student. So up until my master's and through my master's, I was studying literature and languages. And then there was an interruption in my education. And when I returned to get my doctorate, I really was reorienting in terms of neuroscience. And that came more scientifically out of my inquiry into trauma and the human nervous system, and just an investigation of the dynamics that I grew up with, which I knew by that time were not unique to me, and the associations between war, between demographics, between cultural differences, and the repetition of trauma in families, and what was possible in terms of interrupting traumatic repetition, both personally and collectively. So I just want to take a pause here because I've shared some very intimate and personal transformations that shape me. And so even before I go any further, I'm just wondering if you have any questions or if you have any responses to what I've shared that you want to inquire about.
I'll respond. First of all, you do not look 77 or 77, right? And coming from a Jewish heritage too, and currently working with refugee children for social and emotional learning, I have such compassion for that. And I just, what crossed my mind is I so often talk about intergenerational trauma, but what I heard you talking about as well, or embodying, was intergenerational resiliency. And that just reminded me to like include that in the conversation when I do this work too. So thank you. And deep.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you. That's a wonderful addition. And it absolutely, post-traumatic thriving, absolutely. And I would say, and I say this out of self-respect, as well as the honoring of the traditions that I come from and the ancestors on whose shoulders I stand, that throughout what has really been, in many ways, an incredibly challenging life. And I have more to say on that score. I have never lost my curiosity, and I have never lost my creativity, I would say, sums it up to the best of my ability. My capacity to transform the challenges that I've faced into beauty, actually, into poetry. I actually have some poems with me, because poetry really is, in many ways, the voice of my heart and the voice of my soul. And even though I am a scientist, I am a writer, I've written 5 books on the treatment of trauma, I've done clinical research, and I'm about to write another book, I still turn to poetry, I turn to the arts, I turn to movement as a wellspring of health and a wellspring of truth. So I want to invite those of you who are going into fields that are trauma related to keep those aspects of your life alive, to keep doing whatever is creative for you, keep the humor and the vitality and the expressiveness alive in your life. So I actually took a peek at the Pam Leo program that happened, I think, just yesterday. And I was just so struck with her emphasis on reading and on books, because I would say that growing up, libraries were what I bonded with, actually. I was a very familiar figure at the local libraries wherever we lived. I would haunt them. I was really at home in libraries. I'm still at home in libraries. I'm just really sad that libraries are not as wonderful as they used to be, that they've been closed a lot during the pandemic. I mean, a library to me is a church. A library is a sanctuary. And I think it's probably why I write books, that I just want to keep contributing to the way in which language and literature is a source of inspiration to humanity. So I also want to speak specifically to the importance of doing what Kindred does and what I do, which is educating about early life and the central role of supporting development of children and the children of the future. And the awareness that I have, which is quite intricate actually, about the dynamics of prenatal life, the impacts of attunement, attachment, and bonding, and also the impacts of environmental conditions. And when I say environmental conditions, I'm really being quite comprehensive. So those conditions being not only the emotional environment, the psychological environment, but also the degree of the presence of toxins. So I'm highly educated for a variety of reasons on how environmental toxins, everything from auto emissions to, herbicides and pesticides on developing beings, and the consciousness about how our little ones and our future generations are being colonized out of their intelligence and their potential is of great value to me. It's something I have invested a lot in. I've invested a lot in understanding the impacts of early life on adults and helping them repattern those impacts. And I've also invested a lot in educating parents and parents-to-be in a variety of contexts about the impacts of experiences from conception through the primal period and what we can do to make that primal period as rich and healthy as possible. And I think that at this turning point for humanity, that this education it's always been strikingly important. I would say it's more important now than ever before. So I want to stop there because, I've suggested really what is true, which is that we are at a turning point for humanity, which means that for all of you, the future is in doubt. The future of humanity is actually in doubt. So here you are, preparing for your futures at a time when that future is in doubt. And I'm just wondering how you live with that and how you feel about that and how you process that. I would really like to hear from you about your experiences in regard to climate crisis and to what might be the end of human civilization. Well, I think what you're sharing, Cam, is essential. I think that experience of pessimism and that experience of doom clearly is what a lot of people are living with. And that's why anxiety rates are so high, and that's why youth suicide is on a scale with the COVID pandemic. And I think we have to face that squarely, that you're exactly right. The real issue is fossil fuels. The real issue is carbon. And until those carbon levels go down, we're doomed. We are doomed until those carbon levels go down. And the only counter I can offer to that is really what Greta Thunberg shares, which is we do have a sliver of a window still left. And that sliver of a window, the light that comes through that sliver, is really about reducing carbon usage. So it's around educating people to only drive electric cars. It's about educating people to use as little carbon as possible. It's around doing your best to reach those people who have a willingness to make those shifts and really inspiring them to make those shifts and to tell other people to make those shifts so that that message is propagated. And then there is another factor, which is the mystery factor, that there is the data, and the data is real. And you are spot on, you are right. Carbon levels have not gone down. That's the nitty-gritty. We could feel it right now. I'm living in the Pacific Northwest. Today is not too bad, but we've had 112-degree temperatures here. We've never had 112-degree temperatures in this part of the world ever before. Never in the history of time. So that's the evidence that our carbon usage is not declining. We are not reducing global warming. So I definitely believe that this extremity has the potential to wake people up, and there's still that sliver. And then there is the mystery that data may not be everything. So that mystery piece needs to be factored in and needs to be lived in, which is that, and this is how I live really, regardless of the data, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing to make a difference. So that addresses what you were saying about the despair and the pessimism. Despair and pessimism, even on a neuroendocrine level, on the level of biochemistry, is illness-inducing. So being able to stay in a forward-moving, inspired direction is one of the places, Dave, where the inner and the outer climates meet. So in that mystery place, which is connected to that sliver of opportunity, there is what Resh was referring to so beautifully, which is our connection with the natural world. So the natural world, the world of the elements, the world of the soil and the earth, the world of the forests and the mountains and the rivers, those living systems want to communicate with us to give us what data cannot record, to give us the capacity to make the changes that need to be made and to inspire others to make those changes. And I do come from a long line of resilient, enduring people who have overcome incredible odds. And that is a part of my lineage that I am replicating. And that is substantiated by my relationship with the natural world. And I will say that since I fused my work as a trauma specialist with climate activism, that my communication with the natural world has accelerated. So I created Climate Change and Consciousness, which is a global organization. You're welcome to join it. I think you have the website, cccearth.org. And I developed that organization, not because I needed another organization, hardly, but because I was told to do that. And so who told me to do that? I would say the natural world told me to do that. Why the natural world told me to do that? That will probably be a mystery till I'm dead. But I was told to create Climate Change and Consciousness, which is an organization that does exactly what Dave described. It's an organization that allows people to see how their inner transformation is climate activism and how their inner transformation leads to the climate activism that is theirs to do. So there's the belief that each one of us has our own brand of climate activism. You know, so it's not necessarily about joining this group or that group. It's about finding your alignment. And I would say that means your connection with the natural world and then going for it. You know, it could be what Kindred does. That's climate activism in my mind. What Darcia is doing, educating about the evolved nest, that's climate activism. And if that's what turns you on, and you can tell it turns you on because it literally does turn you on from a biochemical standpoint, because your oxytocin is flowing. And when your oxytocin is flowing, when your dopamine is flowing, when you're excited, like I'm getting right now, you know, you can't really be in that pessimistic state, even though the data is there. So I offer that to you, Cam. I offer to you the possibility of finding your unique brand of climate activism. And my guess is, my theory is, that that will pull you out of that pessimism. Not that the pessimism is unmerited. It is absolutely merited. Look at the data. You have the right to be pessimistic. But the pessimism is not going to change the dynamic. What is going to change the dynamic is what I now call voicing your truth. Voicing Your Truth is a program I developed. I just taught a program in Voicing Truth today. And it's a container, a lab, you might say, to assist people in finding what voicing their truth means for them. And it's usually born out of your trauma history. And it's a path to health as well. The more that you're in alignment with your purposefulness and your contribution to the truth of what is happening now, actually, the healthier you are. You just have to have a lot of self-care in place so that you don't work yourself to death.